They handed me a brochure, like I was a problem they'd finally solved. It was a Tuesday morning, and my son and his wife had come over for coffee, which should have told me something right away. They never came over on Tuesdays. My daughter-in-law set a glossy pamphlet on the kitchen table beside my cup, and my son kept his eyes on his hands. The place was called Sycamore Glen. Assisted living for active seniors, it said on the cover, above a photo of white-haired people doing water aerobics and smiling like they meant it. "We've done a lot of research," my daughter-in-law said. Her name is Tiffany, and she uses that voice when she's already decided something. Smooth and careful, like she's reading from a script she rehearsed in the car. It's really a beautiful community, very active. They have a garden club. My son, whose name is Walter, said nothing. He was 39 years old and could not look at his mother. I picked up the brochure. I read it the way you read something when your hands need something to do. Gourmet dining, monthly socials, on-site wellness center. I was 67 years old. I walked 2 miles every morning. I drove myself to the grocery store. I paid my own bills and kept a clean house and still made my granddaughter's birthday cake from scratch every October. "We're not saying right now," Tiffany said. "Just, we think it's worth a conversation. Before things get complicated. Before things get complicated." I set the brochure down. I looked at my son. He was staring at the table like there was something written there he needed to memorize. "What things?" I said. He cleared his throat. "You're alone a lot, Mom. The house is big. We worry." What he meant was, the house is inconvenient and so are you. I didn't say that. I said I'd think about it. I walked them to the door, hugged them both, watched the car back out of the driveway. Then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and looked at the brochure for a long time without touching it. My husband, Gene, had died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After that, I became a different category of person in my family's life. Not a widow in any romantic sense, just a logistical concern. Someone to check in on, someone who needed managing. I thought of all the Christmases I'd cooked for, all the school pickups when Tiffany had her migraines. The 3 weeks I'd stayed with them when their younger one, my grandson, had his tonsils out, sleeping on their pull-out couch and making soups and doing laundry and folding it all warm from the dryer at 11 at night. I thought of how I'd handed over $10,000 when they bought this house without being asked, because they needed the down payment, and I had it and they were my family. I thought about all of it, sitting alone at my kitchen table, and then I pushed the brochure to the edge and let it fall into the trash. The next morning, I called my travel agent. I hadn't used one in years, but I remembered her from the trip Gene and I had taken to Ireland the year before he got sick. A small woman named Peg who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and actually answered the phone. I found her number in my address book. She picked up on the second ring. "I'd like to go to Japan," I said. "Solo 3 weeks." There was a pause. "When?" "As soon as possible." Another pause. Then, "I'll get started today." I hadn't been to Japan. I'd wanted to go for years. Gene was more of a mountains man. He liked the Rockies, liked Canada, liked places where he could see a long distance and breathe cold air. Japan was mine. The cherry blossoms, the temples, the food, the particular kind of quiet I'd read about in books and seen in photographs and never quite let myself pursue. Now I was pursuing it. I spent that evening looking at my savings. Gene had left things in order. He was always careful that way. And I had enough. Not extravagant, but enough. Enough to go somewhere for 3 weeks and sleep in decent rooms and eat what I wanted. I didn't tell Walter. I didn't tell Tiffany. I started getting the paperwork together. My passport was still valid. I found it in the drawer where I keep important things, and I sat with it for a moment. The photo was 12 years old. I looked younger in it, or maybe just less acquainted with certain truths. I put it in my travel folder and kept going. The night before my flight, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the neighborhood. A dog somewhere down the block, the sound of a car on wet pavement. I thought about whether I was running away. I decided I wasn't. Running away means you're afraid of something. I wasn't afraid. I was done. There's a difference. My neighbor Agnes said she'd collect my mail and water the plants. She's 73 and sharper than most people half her age, and she asked no questions when I told her I'd be gone 3 weeks. Just said, "Good," and meant it. The airport felt enormous at 5 in the morning. I moved through it slowly, which I've learned is the only way. People who rush through airports are unhappy people. I bought a coffee, found my gate, sat down, and watched a family of 4 negotiate a stroller through a narrow corridor. The children were small and bewildered. The parents were exhausted in that particular way. That's also a kind of love. I thought about when Walter was small. How he used to crawl into bed between Jean and me on Sunday mornings and just lie there, warm and still, like he only needed to be near us to feel complete. That little boy was still somewhere inside the man who couldn't look at me across my own kitchen table. I wasn't sure how to reach him anymore. I wasn't sure I was supposed to. On the plane, I slept dreamlessly for 7 hours. When I woke, we were somewhere over the Pacific, and the sky through the window was a deep, clear blue that had nothing to apologize for. Tokyo was louder than I expected and quieter in the places that mattered. My hotel was modest. A small room in a neighborhood called Yanaka, which Peg had recommended specifically because it was older, she said, and slower. She was right. The streets were narrow and lined with wooden houses and small shops selling things like pickled plums and handmade brushes and ceramic cups. Cats slept on doorsteps. There was a temple at the end of the block, and every morning someone rang a bell there, and the sound moved through the air like it had permission. The first day, I did almost nothing. I walked to a small restaurant and pointed at something on the menu and ate it. Some kind of noodle soup with a soft boiled egg that tasted like someone had put real thought into it. The waiter refilled my tea without being asked. I sat there for a long time afterward, watching the street through the window, and felt, for the first time in months, that I was not in anyone's way. My phone buzzed at noon. Walter. I looked at the screen, then I put the phone in my bag and ordered more tea. The message, when I finally read it that evening, said, "Mom, Tiffany mentioned you seemed upset the other day. Just checking in." I read it twice, seemed upset, like I was a weather system. I didn't reply. That night, I took a bath in the deep soaking tub the hotel provided, which the Japanese call an ofuro, and I lay there in the hot water until my fingers pruned and thought about nothing at all, which I hadn't been able to do in years. The second day, I went to Ueno Park. It was early October. Not cherry blossom season, just ordinary autumn, and the trees were just beginning to think about color. I walked slowly through the paths and sat for a while near a pond where ducks moved in circles without any apparent agenda. I had a notebook in my bag, a plain blue one I'd bought at a convenience store the night before. I opened it and wrote, "I used to be a person who had opinions. I'd like to be her again." That was the only thing I wrote that day. It was enough. On the 4th day, I met Susanna. She was sitting at the next table at a coffee shop in Shimokitazawa, a neighborhood of vintage clothing stores and live music venues that seemed surprised by me and then not. She was reading a paperback with a cracked spine, and she had short silver hair and the kind of posture that suggests she had somewhere to be once and no longer needed to prove it. She looked up when I knocked my guidebook off the table, reaching for the sugar. "Sorry," I said. "Don't be." She had a British accent with something else underneath it, worn smooth by time. She looked at my guidebook. "First time? To Japan, yes. How long? 3 weeks. She set down her book. "Alone? Yes." She smiled, not with pity, which I'd braced for, but with recognition. "Me too," she said. "I'm Susanna. Retired. Welsh by birth, living in Edinburgh, currently misplaced in Tokyo for 10 more days." We talked for 2 hours. She'd been a secondary school headmistress for 30 years and had the bearing that suggested no one had ever interrupted her twice. She was traveling because, she said, her children had started speaking to her the way people speak to someone who's nearly finished. Carefully, with a kind of careful reverence that was really just dismissal dressed up. I understood this exactly. I told her so. "And your family?" she asked. "Do they know where you are?" "My son knows I'm traveling," I said. "He doesn't know where." She raised an eyebrow. "On purpose?" "On purpose." She nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've already had the argument with themselves that you're currently having with someone else. Then she refilled her coffee and said, "There's a temple in Kyoto I've been meaning to see. I keep putting it off because I'm trying to do things in some sensible order, and I've realized that's a habit I should break." "Which temple?" she told me. I'd read about it. A place called Fushimi Inari, with thousands of orange torii gates winding up a mountain. I'd circled it in my guidebook 2 weeks ago in a moment of private certainty. "I'm going to Kyoto day after tomorrow," I said. She picked up her coffee. "What a coincidence." We took the Shinkansen together, the bullet train that moves so smoothly you have to check the window to confirm you're moving at all. We sat side by side with rice crackers between us and barely talked. That was the thing about Susanna. She didn't require filling in. The silences with her were comfortable in the way. Silences only are when you're with someone who's also done with performing. Kyoto was different from Tokyo. Smaller feeling, even though it wasn't. It had the weight of old things. Our ryokan, a traditional inn, had sliding paper screens and a garden with a stone lantern and a maple tree just starting to turn red. The owner called us both Okyaku-sama, honored guests, and brought us tea in the room. I sat on the low chair at the window and looked at the garden and let myself have that, just that. Walter called that evening. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then I answered, "Mom." He sounded surprised, like he'd expected voicemail. "Where are you?" "Tiffany said the neighbor mentioned you might be traveling." "I'm in Kyoto," I said. "Japan." Silence. "I'm fine," I said. "I'll be home in 2 weeks." You went to Japan? By yourself?" There it was, that tone. Not quite concern. Something between alarm and embarrassment, like I'd done something undignified. "Yes," I said. "It's very beautiful." "Mom, you didn't. You could have said something." "We would have." "What?" I asked. "What would you have done, Walter?" He didn't have an answer. I hadn't expected one. "I'm going to go now," I said. "I'll call again when I can." I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap for a while. Outside, the garden held its shape in the early dark. I didn't feel guilty. That surprised me a little. There had been a time in my life when that conversation would have kept me awake. All night. Now, it felt like setting down something heavy I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had weight. Susanna knocked on my door that evening, with a bottle of sake she'd bought at a small shop near the station. We sat cross-legged on the tatami floor of my room and poured it into the small cups provided and drank it slowly. "He called," she said. "Yes." "How was it? Strange," I said. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. "What did you expect?" "Guilt, I suppose, or grief. Some version of something that would make me want to go home and smooth everything over." And instead, I thought about it. "Distance," I said. "The good kind. Like when you step back from a painting to actually see it." She considered this. "That's the trip working," she said. "How do you mean?" "You can't see yourself clearly when you're always standing inside someone else's version of you." She held up her cup. To finally getting out of frame, I raised mine. We drank. The next morning, we climbed Fushimi Inari. The trail begins in the city and winds up through thousands of orange torii gates, one after another, until you can't see where they end. Some are so close together, you're walking through a kind of tunnel of orange and shadow. Some are weathered and cracked. Some have names carved in the wood, donors, families, a record of people who had wanted something and paid to say so. My knees ached on the steeper parts. I stopped twice to rest and drink water. I didn't apologize for stopping. Susanna stopped when I stopped and looked at the trees and didn't make it into anything. At the top, or near enough to the top that it felt earned, we sat on a bench and looked out over the city below, and I felt something unlock in my chest. Not awe exactly. More like a long-held breath finally let out. I was here. I had gotten here. Not because someone had included me. Not because someone had said yes. Because I had said yes. I took out my notebook and wrote, "Nobody told me I could do this. That's probably why it matters." Back in Kyoto, there were 3 missed calls from Tiffany. 1 voicemail. I listened to it that night in my room. Miriam. My name is Miriam, and I'd begun to notice how rarely anyone said it anymore. Not just Tiffany, but anyone. "We're getting a little concerned. Can you just let us know you're okay? The kids are asking about you." A pause. "Just please check in." The kids. My grandchildren, Declan, who was 14, and his sister Faye, who was 11. Nobody talked to me like a person much anymore, but those 2 still knocked on my bedroom door on Christmas morning like waking me up was worth doing. I sent Faye a message. "I'm in Japan, sweetheart. I saw a gate you would have loved, 1,000 of them in a row. I'll show you pictures when I get home. Love you, Grandma." She replied within minutes, "Are you serious? You have to bring me here someday? And then? Are you okay?" "Dad seems kind of weird." I smiled at that. "I'm wonderful," I wrote. "Your dad is fine. Tell him I'll call soon." From Kyoto, we took a train to Hiroshima, which I had not planned but which felt necessary. The Peace Memorial Museum was the hardest hour I'd spent in years. Not because of shock. I knew the history. but because standing inside it, in the particular silence that place holds, something settled in me about what actually matters. Not the brochure on the kitchen table, not my daughter-in-law's careful voice, not whether I inconvenienced anyone by continuing to exist loudly. We stood in front of a display for a long time without speaking. Then Susanna said quietly, "I think of things like this when my children imply I'm too much to manage." She paused. "Reminds me what real trouble looks like." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. But I thought about it for days afterward. In Osaka, we ate ourselves into a comfortable stupor. The food there operates at a different level. Okonomiyaki hot off the griddle, takoyaki from a cart on a corner, ramen at 11 at night in a tiny shop with 8 seats, where the chef did not look up when we walked in and brought us exactly what we needed. Susanna negotiated everything with confidence and a small phrasebook. I watched her and thought, this is what it looks like to take up space without apology. Walter sent a longer message that night. He'd heard from Agnes, apparently. He knew I was in Japan, he wrote. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening. We were just trying to look out for you." And then, after a few lines about the kids and the weather, "Do you think we could talk? Not about the sycamore thing, just talk." I read it twice. Then I put the phone down and didn't reply, not because I was punishing him, because I didn't know yet what I wanted to say. And I'd spent too many years saying the first thing that kept the peace instead of the true thing. I was going to wait until I knew. Susanna left from Osaka to fly home to Edinburgh. We stood outside the station with our bags and didn't make it ceremonial. "This was good," she said. "Very good." She looked at me the way people look at you when they know they may not see you again and don't want to say so. "You're going to be fine," she said. "Not because everything gets easier, just because you've remembered you're the kind of person who handles things." I hugged her. She hugged back with real conviction. Then she walked into the station, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. In the Osaka morning, cars and bicycles, and the smell of something frying somewhere nearby, and I felt alone. Yes, but not lonely. There's a difference there too. I was getting better at telling them apart. I had 5 days left. I spent 3 of them in Nara, where ancient deer wander freely through the town as if the whole place belongs to them, which in some ways it does. I stayed in a small guest house, run by a woman in her 70s, who laughed at things I couldn't understand and made breakfast every morning without asking what I wanted, just brought it out, and it was always exactly right. On my second evening in Nara, I sat in the garden with my notebook and wrote the things I hadn't been able to say. Not to Walter, not to Tiffany, just out loud, on paper, to myself. "I spent 4 years after your father died trying to make myself smaller so you'd feel less worried. I kept the house immaculate so you wouldn't have an excuse. I never mentioned being lonely. I pretended. I loved watching the grandchildren because I didn't want to be a burden, even though it was the one part that actually kept me going. The brochure was not the thing that broke it. The brochure was just the moment I finally let myself see what had been building for years. You stopped asking what I wanted somewhere around the time your father got sick, and you never started again. I'm not writing this to be cruel. I'm writing this because I need to know I can say it before I decide whether to say it to you." I didn't cry. I closed the notebook and watched a deer move through the shadows at the edge of the garden, unhurried and indifferent to my presence, and I thought, that is an animal that does not require anyone's permission to be where it is. I went back to Tokyo for my last 2 nights. On the second evening, I sat on a bench in Yoyogi Park as the light turned gold and the young people passed. Students, couples, a group practicing some kind of dance in a clearing, all focused and unself-conscious. I watched them and felt no wistfulness. Just a sort of clean pleasure at being present for something that had nothing to do with me. My phone buzzed. Faye. Grandma. "Dad is acting really weird. He went quiet after dinner, and Mom said it's 'cause he's worried about you, but she said it in a way that seemed like she's actually the one who's worried. Also, Declan says hi." I laughed out loud on that park bench, the kind of laugh that surprises you. "Tell your brother hi back. Tell your parents I'm more than fine. I'll be home in 2 days. Are you going to be different?" she wrote, "when you come back?" I looked at that for a while. "Yes," I wrote, "I think so. Is that okay?" She sent back a single word. "Good." On the flight home, I did something I hadn't planned on. I took out my notebook and I recorded a voice memo, just spoke into my phone quietly, up against the engine noise, while the cabin was dark and most people slept. "Walter, I'm on my way home. I want to say something before I see you, because face to face I'll probably soften it, and I don't want to this time. I love you. I want to be clear about that, because what I'm about to say might not feel like it comes from love, but it does. When Tiffany put that brochure on my table, something finished. Not my love for you, just my willingness to be managed. I am 67 years old and I am not declining. I am not a problem to be solved or a liability to be contained. I am your mother. I am also a person who has thoughts and desires and a life that matters. Not just as a function in your family, but as a thing in itself. I'm not coming home to be put somewhere convenient. I'm coming home to be a person. If you want me in your life on those terms, I'm here. But I need you to hear me say it. I'll see you soon. I sent it before I could think too long about it. Then I put the phone away and stared at the dark window, at my own faint reflection floating somewhere over the Pacific, and I felt, not brave exactly, just finally honest. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Agnes had done a beautiful job with the plants. There was a note on the counter. Welcome back, traveler. Coffee's in the freezer. I smiled at that. I unpacked slowly, put things away, stood in the kitchen, and let the familiar quiet settle around me. Walter called 20 minutes after I landed. I let it ring. I wasn't ready yet. I needed a cup of coffee and a night's sleep and some space to become fully myself again before I let the rest of it back in. Faye texted, "Are you home yet? Just walked in," I wrote. "Can I come see you tomorrow?" "Yes, come for lunch." She arrived with her backpack and a grocery bag and zero ceremony, walked into my kitchen like it was hers, which it always had been. She looked taller. Or maybe I was just seeing her more clearly. She hugged me for a long time. Not a quick hug. The kind that says something. "You look different," she said, pulling back and studying my face. Good different, or bad different? She thought about it seriously, the way 11-year-olds do when they're choosing honesty over kindness and know it matters. "Like you remembered something," she said. "That's a good way to put it." We made lunch together, sandwiches, soup from a can, apple slices, the kind of meal that doesn't require much but holds a conversation perfectly. She told me about school, about a project she was doing on climate ecosystems, about how her brother had learned to parallel park and had immediately hit a trash can. Then, more carefully, "Dad listened to your message." "I know. He didn't say anything for a really long time." She paused. "Then he went and sat outside by himself. Mom left him alone, which was smart. He came back in and said, I don't know exactly. He thought I wasn't listening. He said, I think I got it wrong." I held my coffee cup with both hands. "That's something," I said. "Is it enough?" I looked at my granddaughter, this sharp, attentive, already wise girl who saw more than people gave her credit for. "Not yet," I said. "But it's a start." She nodded. Then she reached into her backpack and took out a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing, careful, detailed, in the style she'd been developing for the past year. A woman standing on a mountain path surrounded by orange gates, stretching ahead and behind her as far as the eye could see. Looking forward, not back. "I made it from your photos," she said. "I wanted to understand where you were." I unfolded it carefully. There I was, small against all that orange and green and light. "This is very good," I said. She shrugged in the way young people do when they know it is but don't want to say so. I wrote something on the back. I turned it over. In her handwriting, which was already better than mine had ever been. She went without being invited, and that was the whole point. Walter came 2 days later. Alone, not Tiffany, which told me he knew this needed to be just us. He stood at the door for a moment before I opened it wider to let him in, and I saw in his face something I hadn't seen since Jean died. Not grief exactly. Something more honest than grief. Recognition. He sat at the kitchen table where Tiffany had laid the brochure. I made coffee. Neither of us was in a hurry. "I listened to your message 3 times, he said. "Okay, I didn't know you felt that way. About being managed. About." He stopped. "I thought I was helping." "I know you did. That's not an excuse." "No," I agreed, "it isn't." He wrapped both hands around his mug. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. Normal Tuesday sounds. "I keep thinking about what phase," he said. "She told me." He paused. "She said, Dad, Grandma went all the way to Japan by herself because nobody asked her what she wanted." And I didn't have anything to say to that. I looked at my son, 39 years old, trying to find his way back to a conversation we should have had 4 years ago. I thought about the little boy who used to lie between us on Sunday mornings and just needed to be near us. I'm not asking you to fix everything at once, I said. I'm asking you to start asking. He nodded slowly. Then, what do you want, Mom? Right now, what do you actually want? It was such a simple question. I had to think about it for a moment because I wasn't used to being asked. I want to be included, I said, in real things, not just called when something needs doing. I want to have dinner with you sometimes where I'm a guest, not a cook. I want you to tell me about your life, not just manage mine. I paused. And I'd like to take Faye to Japan someday. She'd lose her mind over the deer in Nara. Something moved across his face, something loosening. I think that sounds right, he said. He didn't stay long. An hour, coffee, a few halting sentences about the grandchildren, about the summer, about things we'd stopped talking about without either of us noticing. When he stood up to leave, he stopped at the door. I'm sorry, he said, not elaborately, just 2 words, plainly meant. I know, I said. I believe you. That was enough. Not everything. Not the whole distance crossed, not the years returned. But a door opened. I'd learned by now that you don't need to see the whole hallway. You just need the door to move. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket and my notebook. The maple in the front yard was turning. Finally, that slow surrender to red that happens every fall, whether you're watching or not. I wrote on a new page. Things I know now that I didn't know 3 weeks ago. Solitude is not the same as loneliness. You have to practice telling them apart. The most radical thing I did was not cancel a brochure or board a plane. It was deciding, somewhere over the Pacific, that I was still worth knowing. My granddaughter sees me. I didn't realize how much that matters until I almost forgot to let her. Grief doesn't end. But it doesn't have to be the whole room. It can just be a corner of the room, and you can put other furniture in. Susanna was right. You can't see yourself when you're standing inside someone else's version of you. I closed the notebook. The maple held its color in the dark. The street was quiet. Inside, the house held all its familiar shapes. The chair where Jean used to read. The photos on the hall table. The kitchen where I'd raised a boy who was currently, I hoped, somewhere learning a new way to see his mother. I was 67 years old. I had walked up a mountain in a foreign country because no one had told me I could. I had eaten noodle soup alone in Tokyo and felt, for the first time in years, that I wasn't in anyone's way. I wasn't finished. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Whatever they decided about me, whatever category they'd put me in, whatever brochure they'd printed up to handle me, they had miscounted. There were years left in me, real ones, full of wanting things and going places and being a person of some consequence. I went inside, turned off the porch light, and went to bed. In the morning, I'd call Peg and ask her about Nara in the spring.